The administration is still their paid liar, their spokesperson, picture behind. He's still making up things about what happens and calling this local rogue.
Well, that was Congressman Issa on CNN's State of the Union this weekend, referring to the White House press secretary, Jay Carney, and the idea that the targeting of conservative groups and others by the IRS was the doing of so-called rogue agents, a couple of rogue agents out of the Cincinnati office of the IRS. But Mr. Issa's not-so-subtle jab was met with a sharp response by a couple of the president's top advisors. Here is what, for example, David Plouffe had to say in his Twitter response to Mr. Issa's remarks. Quote, "Strong words from Mr. Grand Theft Auto and suspected arsonist / insurance swindler and loose ethically today." And the man who used to have Jay Carney's job, Robert Gibbs, went more or less the same route, attacking Mr. Issa and his credibility today.
Can I tell you, first of all, Issa should call Jay Carney and apologize this morning. And then he's saying, as the investigator, I know where I want to get, now I'm just getting around to proving it. I mean, it's a stunning thing. It's why 5 people in this town take Issa seriously. The notion that he's in charge of, quote, government oversight might now be the biggest joke in all of Washington.
Joining me now, Brad Blakeman. He's former deputy assistant to President George W. Bush. And Dan Gerstein, who is president of Gotham Ghostwriters, join me now. So the odds of Issa calling up Jay Carney and apologizing to him for calling him a paid liar are, I think, pretty slim. They're pretty slim. But as far as we can tell, Carney never used the word rogue agents, a couple of rogue agents, in referring to who's responsible for the IRS scandal. He did, however, repeat the story that these are just matters involving the office in Cincinnati. And now, you know, it's not just today. We heard news last week as well that tie this scandal to Washington, to some in Washington. And that's really where the two men are at issue. But before we get to the substance of the dispute between them, this is getting really ugly now. Brad, I want to get your take on this. And, you know, to have the chairman of the Oversight Committee calling somebody a paid liar, Jay Carney a paid liar, and then to have David Plouffe, one of the president's most senior advisors, coming out and calling him a thief, a criminal? Your thoughts?
I think it's now time for a special prosecutor. We need somebody independent between the executive branch and legislative branch. Things are really heating up, and I think if we had somebody come in who had no axe to grind to look at the facts as they exist. Look, I was a target of the IRS during 2009 to 2011 because I ran a successful 501c4. They came after me personally, and they came after our donors, even after we had ceased operating. So they attacked individuals for their political beliefs. In light of the fact that they've attacked individuals, this is a new twist to them attacking groups seeking 501c4 status. So something is terribly wrong. We know that it's wrong because they admitted to wrongdoing, the IRS. The question is now, Megyn, as a lawyer, you know intent. Did they intend to do this for political targeting? That has yet to be fully flushed out, and also was Washington directing it? We know 2 U.S. senators wrote letters asking for the IRS to target these groups. But how far beyond that did it go? Certainly the president spoke out personally as president of the United States against 501c4s and suspected donors to 501c4s. So I think now let's get some fresh eyes, an independent special prosecutor in here, and let the chips fall where they may. But certainly something is terribly wrong at the IRS.
Well, I think we can all agree on that. Something definitely went very wrong at the IRS, and whether it's still going on today, we'll see. I don't know that question's been totally resolved. Dan, I want to ask you, though, about the substance, because Chairman Issa, you know, listen, a lot of people may share his views. With all due respect to Jay Carney, there are a lot of people who don't believe what the White House spokesperson says these days. But it is an entirely different matter to have the chairman of the Oversight Committee come out and specifically call him a, quote, paid liar. Your thoughts on that charge and then the response by David Plouffe?
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of fitting today that they're holding a mental health conference in Washington at the White House because everyone in Washington seems to have lost their mind. This is just getting so out of control. What Chairman Issa said was beneath him and hurts his credibility, which already was in question. And then what David Plouffe did was beyond comprehension. It was petty and childish. And even worse, it cedes the high ground that the White House pretty much has in this back and forth.
For a moment, they had it. I mean, obviously the administration's taken a beating on the IRS scandal from both sides. But for a brief moment, they may have had that high ground and that they gave it away.
I don't get it. And you know, the Republicans are fast turning the grand old party into the grassy knoll party. And to listen to Brad talk about a special prosecutor, you know, just brings up the same stuff with Benghazi, which is causing the American people to kind of go, what are you talking about?
Look, wait, are you kidding me? 70% of the American people believe that there's a cover-up here.
And want a special prosecutor.
All parties
and want a
special prosecutor. So how is it the Republicans are somehow doing something that the people themselves want? The fact of the matter is,
Brad, you want to engage in a witch hunt?
prosecutor.
You want to engage in a witch hunt to attack the president?
But we have a president who feigns that he's outraged and allows people to step down, resign, and instead of firing people for cause, for their admission that they politically targeted people.
Well,
this
but let me jump in,
away.
Brad, because before I give it back to Dan, he fired the president can't fire everybody at the IRS. He can only fire the political appointees. So he fired, I call him Elliot Gold. He looks just like him. Stephen Miller, right? He fired him. And then the second guy beneath him, he went to. And that's it so far. But what more can the president do in terms of firings at the IRS?
The bureaucrats within the IRS can fire people for cause, certainly. And then the burden is on them and to prove that they were fired unjustly. And the IRS has the burden to prove they were fired for cause. This idea that somehow a bureaucrat can continue to do wrongdoing or continuing their job after they've done wrongdoing is ridiculous. As a matter of law, they can be terminated.
Brad, but I got to tell you,
ahead,
to
Dan.
listen to the conservatives talk, first about Benghazi, but then about this, it just seems a complete part of a pattern to try and attack and destroy the president and not to actually deal with wrongdoing.
There are things going
but there's
wrong.
no evidence. But there's no evidence that the president
Because you
did
thwarted the
anything
ability
wrong.
to get the evidence. That's called a cover-up.
Well, let me jump in there. Let me
That's
jump in there. Let me jump in there.
What evidence do you have of a
Dan,
cover-up?
but here's the question, because today there does not appear to be evidence linking it directly to the president, certainly not the IRS scandal, other than anecdotal or, you know, inferences that people are making. But does that mean they shouldn't probe that angle? I mean, just because that's where we are today doesn't necessarily mean that's where we're going to be 60 days from now.
Listen, what the IRS did was wrong, dumb, and unacceptable. And there should be accountability, and there is accountability. And I'm fine holding congressional hearings, but what the conservatives are doing now is just piling on and weaving these wild conspiracy theories. I mean,
But
unfortunately,
Issa
Bill
didn't
O'Reilly.
say this comes from President Obama. He said it comes from Washington headquarters, and he does have some proof of that. We just discussed it.
But but okay, fine. Let's investigate how high it went up within the IRS. But that's to go with a special prosecutor. You're taking an elephant gun to shoot an ant. And it's just a classic overreaction.
Look, if the president was open and transparent, Dan, he could solve this in 2 seconds. On Benghazi, why don't you release your schedule, Mr. President? You told us what you were doing, tick-tock in chapter and verse when you got Osama, but somehow
But Brad,
in
you guys
Benghazi,
got to
we're
listen
not
to yourselves
entitled
talk.
to it. Now
You're
on the
talking
IRS,
about a scandal about talking points, editing talking
on the
points.
IRS, Mr. President, why the head of the IRS was summoned to the White House over 150 times. I scheduled a president. It's beyond comprehension that an official in the IRS would come to the White House, not to speak to the president, but even those senior staff, 3 times, more or less, 150
But
times.
that's the
fact that
whole
you
problem
won't tell
with
us
this.
why you were there tells me there must be something wrong.
He was there to talk about the implementation of Obamacare.
Nonsense.
Now, if you want to attack him about that.
Well,
Yeah,
that
well, then
hasn't
prove it.
really been answered. I mean, he said he went there for the Easter egg roll among some other business.
Well, I'm sure there are plenty of reasons for the head of the IRS.
But that snarky response is what leads people to say there's more to the story. I don't feel like I'm getting the full truth. We'll see. We'll see as the days and weeks go on. Gentlemen, thank you both so much.
Thanks, Megyn.
Well, we are awaiting a new hearing about the IRS in just about an hour right here. That may feature new questions about Lois Lerner, Sarah Ingram, and why both women are still on the payroll. You're paying their salaries when they both had big roles in the unit that admits targeting conservative groups. What's the deal? Ms. Ingram appears to have gotten a promotion, and old Lois was asked to step down and refused, so we still pay her.